That Baltimore Ravens offensive line rotation, yeah, seems like that's not happening anymore based off of John Harbaugh's comments.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Appreciate everybody for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Thank you to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners, for somewhere in the middle. Thank you as well. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content and coverage, and we have a jam-packed episode. Is John Harbaugh, his comments indicating that O-line rotation is officially done with. We'll also dive into Daniel Faalele getting more national attention, as well as a crossover Thursday with James Rapien of Locked On Bengals. Today's crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens is presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Well, John Harbaugh spoke to the media on Wednesday, and he was asked about Emory Jones, and Harbaugh talked about Emory Jones a little bit on Monday, and he was asked about, is the plan trying to still sprinkle him out there in the rotation plan that he was before 2 weeks ago? And John Harbaugh straight up just said, no, it's not the same plan as that right now. No. So, I think there are a couple of things that we need to clarify here, because John Harbaugh essentially burying hope in my eyes for this offensive line this season if it comes down to that. There are a couple of things I want to say, though. First of all, the hope's been honestly probably buried for a long time here. They just don't have the guys on the O-line this season. They don't have the depth on the O-line this season, and this is the bed that Eric DeCosta made for the Ravens, and everybody has to lay in it. John Harbaugh's laying it, and again, is the head coach, he should see that these guys aren't working out, particularly at the guard spots where he's in Faalele, but, the team just continues to trot them out there. But if there was any player that you at least could try to put your hope in, it was Emory Jones, who didn't look great, but didn't look terrible. Just kind of looked like a rookie. That seems to be the consensus out there. And, Harbaugh was asked about Emory Jones on Monday, and he said that he only played okay in the Bengals game. He said, quote, "It wasn't better than either one of the other two guys in his first game. He didn't outplay those guys. So you go into the game with your best guys that you feel are playing the best. You have to meet players where they're at." And he then said, on Monday, that's not to say he couldn't get more time this week based on what happens in practice or how guys are doing health-wise and those sort of things. But that's where it was at. So it's a switch up, right? From not to say he couldn't get more time this week to no, that's not the plan. And again, I don't know what the plan is. So maybe they're trying something different. They signed Laken Tomlinson to their practice squad on Tuesday, and John Harbaugh talked about Laken Tomlinson. Seems pretty excited to have him in the building. So we'll see about that. But it's also unfair to place the weight of the world on Emory Jones's shoulders as an offensive lineman. But with Harbaugh's comments, I guess, we're not going to see it. So with this O-line, I have very little hope that this team can do a lot. It's their biggest weakness by far, and it is disappointing to kind of see. And Daniel Faalele, he's getting more and more and more and more national media attention. I mean, everybody's getting on it. We talked about Shannon Sharpe and his rants on Faalele. Others have gone on rants about Faalele in the national media. There were other guys. I mean, Quincy Avery, he said the Ravens have an offensive lineman who plays like he doesn't get to hear the play call. He just has to read and react based on what the people around him do post-snap. It's kind of glorious to watch. And then Dan Orlovsky commented on that and said, RG, meaning right guard. And then Quincy Avery responded to him and said, there for the vibes. I mean, it's embarrassing. Quite frankly, it is embarrassing, this Ravens offensive line. And I'm sure that now that it has picked up national attention, it will continue, especially because now the Ravens have these two primetime games back-to-back in week 16 and 17, as they move the Packers and Ravens game to Saturday, December 27th at 8 p.m. after moving the Patriots-Ravens game to Sunday Night Football. Yeah, Daniel Faalele and that O-line is going to be on full display, and it is embarrassing. The team should be embarrassed. The coaching staff should be embarrassed. The personnel department should be embarrassed. I mean, everybody should be embarrassed. And if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm just kind of sitting there yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I didn't expect to change, but kind of hearing John Harbaugh go from like, yeah, it could get more time this week to no, the rotation is, not the plan. It's disappointing. That's what I'll say there. So we'll just have to, I guess, watch this offensive line for the next 4 weeks. And you know what? If the offensive line plays this way, that will be it. It will be 4 weeks, and then they will be done because they're not going to win with this offensive line doing what they're doing. We'll dive into a crossover Thursday now with James Rapien, talking about key storylines, key matchups, and so much more for that Ravens and Bengals matchup. So we'll dive into all that now.
Kevin, I think a lot of people listening, Bengals fans wise, even Joe Burrow after the fact admitted they were rooting for the Ravens last week. It didn't happen. The Ravens lose to the Steelers. What's been the biggest story in Baltimore this week following the loss to Aaron Rodgers and company?
Yeah, definitely. Now that the Ravens are on their back foot when it comes to their playoff chances, I think everybody understood and knew how important that game was for both the Ravens and the Steelers, where you had, playoff odds jump in for the winner to 70, 75%, and the loser all the way down around, 20, 25, 30%. So it was a big loss for them. The Ravens, with the loss to the Steelers and obviously to Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago, it drops their division record to 2-2, while Pittsburgh is at 3-1. And so all of those scenarios, because I think that in the AFC North, we talked about this last time we spoke, James, I think there's only going to be one AFC North team that makes the postseason, and that is going to be the division winner. And right now, the Ravens, they have a climb to get to the postseason. And even if they get there, it's like, how far could they even go at this point? Because the other storyline, obviously, is the way that the offense has looked and the inconsistency there, the slow starts. The offensive line hasn't been good the entire season. They signed Laken Tomlinson to their practice squad on Tuesday, but, he was released from the Texans, who, he started some games. Do they maybe see something there? I'm not sure. But, at the end of the day, it's been hard to keep Lamar Jackson upright. And on the flip side of that, they let Aaron Rodgers stay upright for the entire game. 0 sacks on Aaron Rodgers. I thought we were in 2015, the way he was running around and moving. He scored a touchdown on a rollout play with his legs. Yeah.
Did the discount double check. But most people don't even remember that.
We're doing the state, all that stuff. So it's been rough all the way around for Baltimore this season. Falling below 500 this late in the year is really tough. And I think that honestly, there are things you can take away from both games, the Cincy game on Thanksgiving night, as well as this Pittsburgh game last week. Different things that kind of have contributed to how Baltimore has played this season, which is it's just kind of been what to me feels like a very upsetting, disappointing, and frustrating year. And I'm sure the organization feels that way too.
Yeah, it's a bad division.
It is. I'm embarrassed.
We're not used to it. We're not used to that, right? We're used to it being close. And it's close because all of these teams are really good and physical and have their strengths, and the other strengths balance out the weaknesses of other teams, and they're really tough matchups. And it's just not that. Look, I'm surprised the Ravens didn't win that game, but it's not shocking just because I think everyone's pretty close here. They have their obvious flaws, and that's what's interesting to me about this game is we know what happened. Joe Burrow comes back. He's had that game circled in Baltimore for a while now. And then to go out and play the way they did for most of that Buffalo game, boy, oh boy, did it feel like, holy smokes, they are back. Joe Burrow is back, this team. And then we got reminded that they can't overcome an interception or two, right? And they were devastating interceptions, but the defense had a chance. And that's been the story is, really, Joe Burrow better be perfect, because if not, the roster isn't good enough otherwise. And for everything that we say about Burrow, and I do believe he makes them so much more dangerous and so much scarier, for them to not be able to get off the field against Josh Allen in multiple fourth down opportunities late in the fourth quarter on the road, in one fourth down, one third down. In the 3rd and 15, and Josh Allen just walks for 17 yards. And it was just the easiest first down of the world for him to clinch the game. Now I wonder how that plays and what they're going to look like against their Ravens team that is beatable. The Ravens are favored according to FanDuel, but it's one of those toss-up type of games. So given the Bengals' chances now at roughly 3% to make the playoffs, I think that conversation goes by the wayside. Wouldn't have had they beat the Bills last week, but that goes by the wayside. And it's more about, all right, can the Bengals play well enough to sweep a team that is certainly firmly in the playoff mix and has a better chance than the Bengals do right now to win the AFC North? That's what I look at. I don't really question Joe Burrow, even this offensive line. I think we know what they are at this point. We also know where the flaws are, and those flaws are pretty darn big.
Yeah, but both these teams are dealing with it. And I know for Cincinnati, it was something that we had talked about heading into that first game of Cincinnati's defense is on pace to be like this all-time poor unit. And again, to their credit, they had been playing better leading into that game. And of course did play. I mean, they had 5 turnovers on Lamar and that Ravens team, which you're like, okay, great. And then it's like those weaknesses that we had been talking about. And obviously Cincinnati fans and the organization had gone through, all right, are they turning a corner defensively? You have that great performance against Baltimore, and then it all just kind of with Josh Allen, you're like, all right, well, you're in multiple plus situations here. Just try to get this stop or try to get this one play, and then it doesn't go your way, and that obviously snowballs, and it's an unfortunate way to kind of lose a game. And it seems like the story of the year for Cincinnati, whether it's them putting up 40 plus and the other team scores 50, or them putting up 30 plus and the other team scores 40. It's like you have this high-powered offense, and that's kind of like what I had talked about after the game on Thanksgiving night is the Ravens defense held on for dear life against that Cincinnati team in the first half, forcing Evan McPherson to come on the field and kick field goals, stopping the Bengals when they got plus field position. And by plus field position, I mean the Ravens 3-yard line was their starting spot, and they still weren't able to get in the end zone. But, I think we saw Joe early just trying to feel things out in that game. But I said that, when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, he's going to figure it out. And as an offense for Baltimore, you had to get back in that football game or at least put yourself in better position because that run is coming. And once it came, the Ravens offense didn't have a response to it. And so that's the difference is the Bills did. The Bengals were putting up points and the Bills said, okay, we're going to match you. And the Ravens in that Thanksgiving game said, no, we're not going to match you. We're going to let you run wild in that second half and, throw all over the field. And even without T. Higgins, I mean, you saw Andre Yoshivas step up and other guys. I know Mitchell Tinsley had kind of a rough game. Stopped running his route. Did they ever address that, James? Mitchell Tinsley stopped running his route on that play in the end zone. Was there ever a conversation about that?
I can't remember. It got lost in the shuffle, and because they ran away with the game, it doesn't. I'm sure he was asked about it because he talked afterwards. And you're right. That was a huge play because it should have been a touchdown. And Joe was kind of feeling his way back. T. Higgins certainly impacted the red zone stuff. But that's going to be the case again this week. And that's one of the storylines for sure is without T, you have Jamar. He just crossed the 1,000-yard mark.
Yeah.
Can they do enough? And the theme, as you mentioned, that the Bills and the Ravens, the theme is these teams aren't good enough to overcome turnovers and bunches. They're just not. It happened to the Ravens and it happened to the Bengals, and they gave themselves a chance, even with the back-to-back interceptions. They gave themselves a chance, but they're not talented enough to do that. And so which team can make a play or two and force a Lamar fumble or a Joe Burrow fumble or an interception or one of these guys to fumble? I think that's a key for both teams that we can spoil ahead of time, but there's certainly some big matchups that we need to discuss in this one as another AFC North tilt. It's Bengals and Ravens round 2. We'll discuss the top matchups coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy the way it should be. This holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening, and PrizePicks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. All you do is pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. PrizePicks, well, it makes it fun because you could say, all right, well, Joe Burrow is going to throw for more than his number of passing yards. Lamar Jackson is going to throw for more than his number of passing yards as well. Boom, throw those together, and you can start making money today. Download the PrizePicks apps and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. All right, Kevin, let's dive into some of these matchups. And I think the first one, you mentioned it as how it pertains to Aaron Rodgers and what happened Ravens Steelers. This Bengals offensive line has held up well. Joe Burrow's been sacked once in each of the past 2 games. and they were on blitzes. It wasn't, coming off the edge pressure he didn't see against the Bills. Same thing, I believe, against the Ravens was on a blitz. And so can this offensive line continue to hold up against that Ravens defensive front? That's a huge storyline.
Yeah, it's huge. And the Ravens, after finally figuring out their pass rush and doing that with a combination of being much more aggressive with their blitzes, they brought in Draymond Jones, who was able to win one-on-one matchups early. It's been a struggle over, the last handful of weeks to get to the quarterback and get them down. I mean, in that Cincinnati game on Thanksgiving night, Joe Burrow was only sacked one time. And then against Pittsburgh, yes, Aaron Rodgers sacked 0 times. So it's huge because, look, you can't let any quarterback, I don't care who you are, how much experience you have, you can't let a quarterback sit back in the pocket, feel comfortable, and just kind of go about his business. And you especially cannot do it when they are as good as Joe Burrow. And so we saw that a little bit in the second half of that Cincy game on Thanksgiving night, where guys just weren't getting there. There were even instances where guys overrushed and Burrow was able to step up in the pocket and deliver. So, now that he's back, he's had a couple games under his belt. I mean, Joe's back. Like, he's there. He's doing his thing. And even if it's no T. Higgins in this game and you're still Jamar is still there, first of all. And we know that, Marlon Humphrey has struggled against Jamar for a little bit over the course of his career. I mean, Jamar still loves to play the Ravens. It's his favorite team to play based off of the stats. I mean, the stats are great for Bengals fans, not so great for Ravens fans when he plays against them. But even still, you see other guys step up. I mean, Tanner Hudson with a one-handed snag over Kyle Hamilton in the end zone. Those are the guys who you have to account for. So it's let anybody else beat you, but that's really hard to do when it's Jamar Chase because he's so good. And in this Baltimore secondary, if the pass rush doesn't get there, because I always marry the two, James. I'm like, look, if the pass rush doesn't get there, guys can't cover for that long. You hear about coverage sacks and all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, it's the opposite too, where if the pass rush doesn't get there and you're allowing a guy to sit back in the pocket, I don't care how good you're covering a guy. Receivers can always improvise, especially with guys like Jabbar who know how to work back to Joe Burrow, get open, find a soft spot in the defense. So if you're asking these guys to cover for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, every second it becomes, and the pass rush cannot get there, it's going to be tough. So hopefully guys can step up. I expect the Ravens to try to be aggressive with their blitzes. The problem is blitzing Joe Burrow also really isn't a great idea. It's not a great idea for any of these quarterbacks because especially the good elite guys like a Burrow, a Lamar, an Allen, a Mahomes, et cetera, they know how to beat the blitz. But at some point, I'd rather send pressure and it not get there and you at least try that than just rush forward and have Joe sit back there for 6 or 7 seconds and just dump things off or find guys open. So pass rush is going to be huge, especially because, like you mentioned, that O-line is held up well. I mean, you're seeing a lot of guys step up in the moment, and we saw that against Cincinnati on Thursday night for Baltimore, where they just, couldn't get home as much as they wanted to. And it was a big problem.
Yeah. I think one pass rush wise, it is Carl Lawson. Is he just done? Is that why they released him on Tuesday?
The Ravens have been very interesting over the past, honestly, calendar year in terms of these situations.
Because I'm interested in him. I want him to come home.
Yeah.
Home to Cincinnati and beef up this pass rush with Trey out.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Played in one game. I mean, didn't really make a huge impact or anything like that. But
yeah, I didn't notice him on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. The expectation when he was signed was that he was waiting, he turned down other opportunities to find a situation where he could play. At least that was the understanding that I think a lot of people got from it. And it just never happened. I don't know if I'm sure the acquisition of Draymond Jones probably pushed him further down on the pecking order, but they have other guys like David Ojabo who haven't really contributed. And I'm just saying, why not try Carl Lawson to see what he has? And this was kind of like with CJ Gardner-Johnson. They signed him earlier in the season, but then they traded for Alohi Gilman 2 hours later. And I'm sure CJ Gardner-Johnson was like, wait, we had a plan. And then you go trade for a guy. And so he's now in Chicago, and Chicago's doing good things. So I don't know what the deal is with Carl Lawson. Maybe John Harbaugh will clarify it as the week continues, but weird situation because I thought he could help the team out. And while Draymond Jones has been good for them for the most part, I mean, would have been nice to kind of have him and Carl Lawson because those are two guys that can win one-on-one, something the Ravens haven't been able to really do a lot of this season. So very confusing situation. And you know what? If he did go to Cincinnati, I think he'd help him out.
Yeah, you mentioned 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds to pass, and I just think of Josh Allen, and it's like, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, and people don't want to hear me count, but like that's what it was.
Yeah.
Multiple times where this Bengals secondary was holding up and the corners were where they needed to be, and Josh Allen's just holding it and holding it and holding it. And you have to find a way to disrupt that. And the same thing goes here. Like Lamar, the last thing you want if you're the Bengals is to be his get right team, is to be his team where midway through the game, and I said it before the Thanksgiving game, but it still feels like it's possible now. You don't want to look up and it's this duel where Lamar and Joe are going back and forth, or the Bengals have had a couple turnovers and you can't stop Lamar and you're in a hole. Like that to me is such a big deal for both of these defenses. And then the other element of this, and the Bengals, they did a pretty good job last week against James Cook, holding him to 4.4 yards per carry. They couldn't stop Josh Allen, who was by far the Bills' best runner. But you can't let Derrick Henry get going. And he showed flashes of it a little bit on Thanksgiving. I know people in Baltimore are like, why did he only get 10 carries? And I sort of get it, because I think if they had leaned on him a bit more early, maybe that changes it. But that's always going to be a huge factor here for this Bengals defense anytime they go up against Baltimore. The last thing you want is Derrick Henry to get downhill and make explosive plays.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Ravens O-line, and I know we talked about it a little earlier in the show with how disappointing it's been. But, against Pittsburgh, they opened up a couple of really nice rushing lanes for Derrick Henry. But again, James, there was that problem of like Henry was in the second quarter off the field with his helmet gone and doing like drive rotations with Keaton Mitchell. And I love Keaton, but like you should be using those guys in tandem on the same drive, not alternating them on different drives. And that was one of the big keys for Baltimore, was there was no Derek Harmon for Pittsburgh. And Baltimore, they weren't great running the ball against Pittsburgh, but they weren't bad either. And I just thought that overall, and I'm more so talking like Henry averaged 3.8 yards per carry, but the team as a whole averaged 5.4. And I thought they used Lamar's legs a little better in that game. And so there was a play in the Cincy game on Thursday night where it was a option play with Lamar and Rasheen Ali. And everybody went with Rasheen Ali while Lamar Jackson went to the outside. And I'm just like, this is what it is right now. Of like teams aren't respecting Lamar's legs because of his injury situation. How much can he do? And that's been very different from what we've seen, where guys always go with Lamar regardless of if he has the ball or not. So on those option plays to, let's say, Derrick Henry, you're seeing guys just crash in and know that, okay, we're more worried about Derrick, like you said, and Lamar, he's more so the secondary guy. And that's what, what we saw last season was like making Lamar and Derrick Henry so dangerous was you had to put manpower on both those guys, which would open up the field for whoever had the ball. And it just feels like this year, Lamar's looked better I thought he's looked better every single week. I thought against the Jets game, he looked kind of slow and sluggish and kind of banged up. On the Thanksgiving game, I thought he looked all right. I thought he had some of his explosiveness back. I think we saw a couple vintage Lamar plays. And then against Pittsburgh, I thought he looked even better and he was starting to use his legs again. So, the hope is just he's getting healthier every single week. But even still, for that Bengals defense, if they can stop Derrick Henry and eliminate that factor from the offense like we essentially saw them do, whether it was because the Bengals, we're stopping them at points, or the Ravens just decided we can't do this anymore because we're down, even still, that eliminated a part of the offense the Bengals had to worry about, and they could just kind of pin their ears back, rush Lamar Jackson, and, force turnovers like they did. So whenever you have 5 turnovers in a game, you're not going to win it. And obviously Cincinnati did a great job of forcing those turnovers, and the Ravens played sloppy football. Cincinnati took advantage of it. And that is what it is. But I think in this game, if the Ravens can establish their run game early, work the play action, especially because I know what happened in that game when Buffalo with the tight ends, James. I know what happened. The Ravens
every game, any game.
Yeah. And we talked about it on Thanksgiving.
We did. Yeah, we did.
The Mark Andrews, fresh off an extension, Mark Andrews, who only had one catch for 9 yards in that Steelers game. Isaiah Likely, who obviously has been a controversy point for the last 2 weeks for different reasons. And even Charlie Kohler. I think that if you can work the play action game off of a solid run game, that could be what can put this Ravens offense over the top, because we've seen how the Bengals have struggled with those tight ends. So that's another matchup. Ravens tight ends versus Bengals, everybody on that second and third level of defense.
Oh, no, you're right. It's wild. You mentioned Charlie Kohler, and if that happens, the game winner last week, it wasn't Dawson Knox, it wasn't Dalton Kincaid. Jackson Hall's 4th and 3 has a touchdown. They gave up, for those wondering, I can remember this, 11 catches, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns to the Bills tight ends last week. So painful. And if I was Lamar Jackson, I would be paying attention to the tight ends. Keys to victory. stop all tight ends. We're going to get to those keys to victory coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Car Gurus. Look, you got to check out Car Gurus because car shopping, it should feel exciting. It shouldn't be confusing. And that Car Gurus is going to make it exactly that. It's going to give you the confidence you deserve. Car Gurus makes the whole process simple by giving you real info, real deal ratings, and more listings than anyone else so you can shop the way you want. Use Car Gurus deal ratings to compare cars quickly without having to guess whether or not the price is fair. You'll love being able to filter by everything, mileage, trim, features. So you're only seeing cars that actually fit what you need. That's the beauty of Car Gurus. It's going to save you time, money, stress, and they have verified dealerships and upfront pricing. It makes the whole thing feel transparent and easy to navigate. Car Gurus connects you with trusted dealerships for a transparent and hassle-free buying process with over 4 million. That's 4 million listings, the most of any online automotive marketplace. You'll always find the best deal with Car Gurus. So buy or sell your car next at cargurus.com. That's cargurus.com, cargurus.com, cargurus.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Zocdoc. It's 2025, almost 2026, and the days of waiting for something to become a full-blown emergency before you see a doctor, they're over. No more walking it off for 6 months, pretending that the weird shoulder stiffness is just sleeping wrong. It's time to take your health seriously, and Zocdoc makes it easier than ever. Staying healthy is more important than hitting the gym or eating right. It's about actually getting things checked out when something feels off. Using Zocdoc makes scheduling easier. Search for in-network doctors and book right in the app. Real appointment times are listed, including same-day visits. No more back and forth phone calls, waiting weeks to be seen. No. The app is quick, clean, and honestly removes all the stress of finding the right doctor. You got to get to ZocDoc.com right now. Again, stop putting your doctor's appointments off and get the help you need by going to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Kevin, let's get to keys here. Obviously, the Ravens don't want to get swept by the Bengals. Both teams want to keep their season alive. The Ravens certainly need a win to keep realistic chances, I would say, of winning the North alive before they fall into where the Bengals are. I think it's unrealistic now at just 3%, like 27% if they win out,
right,
for the Bengals to make the playoffs regardless. The Ravens, they don't have to fall into that trap if they get a win on Sunday. What are your keys to victory?
Well, if I had to just pick 3 of them, which I'm going to, number 1 is it has to be the red zone. They have been an abysmal. It feels like we're just doing the same episode we did on Thanksgiving, James. I mean, the Ravens have not gotten any better in the red zone. In that Cincinnati game, I mean, that was one of the reasons. And look, to the Ravens' credit, defensively in that game, they also held the Bengals out of the red zone, or at least scoring touchdowns there. But Baltimore still couldn't convert there. The Ravens last season in the red zone were the best red zone offense in the NFL. They converted at almost 75% of those opportunities. They converted at that rate. This year, they are the 3rd worst red zone offense in the league. And right now, they're just converting at 44.9% of those opportunities. So it's been almost a 30 percentage point drop off for them from last year to this year. And it has to do with a lot of different things. Weird personnel decisions with not having Derrick Henry on the field in certain situations, or, running the ball when they shouldn't, bad execution, bad blocking. And, sometimes, and I think we saw this with the Bengals, it can be harder to score than when you get to the 3-yard line, that field shrinks up. Like, it can be harder sometimes to score from the 3-yard line than the 13-yard line because the field does shrink and you have less opportunities, and you kind of know, like, okay, is this going to be a goal line run or whatnot? And we've kind of had the Ravens fall into that trap a little bit here in Baltimore. So we know that Joe is back. We know that Jamar is there. We know this is a high-powered Bengals offense. You cannot kick field goals and keep up with this Bengals unit, especially with how they've been playing over the last couple of weeks with Joe back. I'd say the second thing that I'm looking for is, Lamar Jackson just has to get back to superstardom, where he was better against the Steelers than he has been over the last 3 weeks leading up to that. But, still based off the expectations Lamar has as a superstar, he has not lived up to those over the last month. And that has to do with a lot of different factors. Again, he's clearly banged up. He has had poor offensive line play, and how much can you do when you have a guy in your face every 1.5 seconds? I know Bengals fans feel that pain over the last handful of years with Joe Burrow and how the offensive line has looked prior to this season. But it's just been really hard for Lamar. And, while he is the master, or at least one of the best, if not the best in the league at escaping pressure, making something out of nothing, running around the field and finding somebody, there's only so much you can ask of him in that category to do. And when you're asking it every single play, that becomes much more of a tough ask, especially when guys like Daniel Faalele are getting blown by on Daniel Faalele is like 300 and, plus almost 400 pounds, got beat by a 150-pound slot corner, not just like ran by, got like out leveraged and ran by there. So it's just been all the way bad there. So that leads me into the third key, which is the offensive line just has to protect Lamar and block. I mean, that 2 and 3 go hand in hand for me, but seeing other guys step up, and with this Cincinnati team that we now know Trey Hendrickson not going to play, not in this game, but for the rest of the season, kind of like what we saw in that Thanksgiving game. Guys on that defensive line for Cincinnati stepped up. They made plays. They got to Lamar, made him uncomfortable. You can't allow that against this Bengals defense. So, whether since he gets creative with blitzing or gets aggressive there, either which way, the offensive line has to pick up assignments, not get blown by, and make Lamar Jackson's life as easy as possible, which they have not done over the last month and honestly the entire season.
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of the keys, and they're going to go almost hand in hand. But I'm going to steal the one from a few minutes ago that you mentioned. You can't let the tight ends beat you. I'm sick of talking about it. And what does that mean? Well, I think the Bengals corners have been pretty good overall. But when we talk about Derrick Henry, or we talk about Lamar Jackson running it, or the tight ends, a lot of that is linebackers. A lot of that is the defensive linemen holding their gaps and where they're supposed to be and being in the right spots and all of those things. So those, whether it's Lamar or Derrick Henry, those rushing lanes aren't open, or whether it's these tight ends making big plays downfield. And those are all things, those specific things plague them against the Bills. And so you can't be Lamar Jackson's get right game. And that's a huge element of this as well, not just the tight ends, but number two, just you can't be his get right game where it's like, oh, everyone's doubting us now. We're 6-7. We go to Cincinnati and get to 7-7 and Lamar's rolling. Maybe the Steelers lose to the Dolphins on Monday night, and then suddenly it feels much, much different for the Ravens. That you can't let that happen. And then the third thing is simple. On offense, protect Joe Burrow and take care of the football. If you do that, he's going to put up points. He will find ways to get points on the board one way or another. Obviously, it wasn't perfect on Thanksgiving, but you felt it. You felt his presence. He made an impact, especially in that second half, that throw to Andre Iosivas that really changed the game. So those are the type of moments that he lives for, and I know he's going to be ready to play. They need the rest of the team ready to go, and a lot of it is going to be on this defense to, especially early on, not let Lamar do Lamar things, not let these tight ends look like the Bills tight ends looked last week. I mean, it was just Dawson Knox, then Dalton Kincaid. And then, oh, you think we're done? Halls is going to score the game-winning touchdown, So, like, tight ends are such a factor here, especially because the Ravens have good tight ends, and they have a really, really good group, as do the Bills, of course. And so that makes it a tough matchup for the Bengals.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. And, these games have become two high-powered offenses here, but the problem for Baltimore is that Cincinnati's is playing like it while the Ravens are not. And you just see over the course of a game, like we saw frustration boil over on the sideline, and we have seen that recently, in that Steelers game. Lamar threw his helmet down after his interception. Lamar does not have a touchdown in essentially his last 4 games, if you want to go back. So, I mean, it's been a really tough year for Lamar with the hamstring injury and him missing a month of that, coming back, being all banged up with everything. But, when this Ravens offense is at its peak, there are barely any offenses that can keep up with them. One of the only ones that can is Cincinnati. And so when Cincinnati's offense is humming and Baltimore's offense is humming, it makes for these like great back and forth games, kind of like what you saw last week with Buffalo and Cincinnati. But if Baltimore can get back to there, you're great. But if they can't, could be a repeat of Thanksgiving, which I know a lot of Ravens fans do not want.
Yeah, The turnovers are a huge factor here, obviously, for both teams. And it is cliche, but I think given their flaws on both sides, not just Bengals, not just Ravens, both sides, if you win the turnover battle, you're going to have a heck of a shot because it's two high-end quarterbacks with flawed teams that are trying to keep pace with Aaron Rodgers, who old man Aaron Rodgers isn't as old as Phillip Rivers.
James is great. Be sure to check him out over at Locked On Bengals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show on the web. Be sure to like and subscribe button in video form and follow along and subscribe in audio form 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the weekday episodes with more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.